Yes, my name is Roger Davison. Thanks for joining us tonight. I'm a personal growth consultant, which means that I help people think differently so they can change their behavior and then get different results. I work as a consultant primarily in the plumbing and heating and air conditioning industry, but I've worked in many different industries over the past 16 years. I've worked for banks, manufacturing companies. Basically, I facilitate building your business through better relationships and growing your people, and growing your team and building high-performing teams by working together and building unity of purpose. Tonight, we have with us Dr. Michael Seaman. Michael, introduce yourself and tell us what you do.
I'm Dr. Michael Seaman. I've worked in the behavioral sciences field for over 30 years. I facilitate health and growth in different systems, couples, families, and businesses. I've done this work for 35 years and understand how to foster better relationships in any of those systems, growing organizations to maximize their fullest potential. So that's what I do.
Okay, good. Thank you very much.
How's that?
Let me know. We got some Facebook viewers. Let me know, Facebook viewers, if you can hear okay, if I need to raise the volume any, and I'll do that if I need to. Tonight's show, we're going to talk about, fiddling with all these devices. Tonight's show, we're going to talk about corporate culture and pathogens in the corporate culture. And Michael's going to talk to us about the root of the problem, and then we're going to talk about symptoms of that root. And I'm going to give some examples that I've seen. Michael, talk to us about the pathogens in the business and what causes. You know, you were talking to me earlier about it's a pathogen is the way you think when you think wrong, or you talk to us more about that.
You know, Roger, what happens is businesses are created among people. People create businesses. And so when we think about pathogens, what we're really talking about, let's back up just a little bit. A pathogen is a virus or a bacteria in biology. And a pathogen has two characteristics. It never learns from its mistakes, and it never tells itself no, just to review from last week. And a virus or a bacteria that is cancer. Cancer doesn't tell itself no and doesn't learn from its mistakes. So what happens is when we think about business and industry, we talk about couples, we talk about families, we talk about businesses. All these systems are made up of people. And so when we think about how do businesses get infected? They get infected with the way people think about interaction, about the customer, about coworkers, or about the whole process of interacting. And so what we're going to talk about tonight is some of the core elements that contribute to those two characteristics of a pathogen. And that is where a pathogen doesn't learn from its mistakes and doesn't tell itself no. And so that underlying process is really about how people receive, how people give, and how people receive. And one of the concepts we began talking a little bit about last week was the idea that people either receive and give freely, or they receive and give based on what's fair. Now, we would readily admit that life is not fair. Anybody just asked straight up, is life fair, would automatically say, well, no, life's not fair. But interestingly enough, I think this is where we deceive ourselves, and we start through a process of trying to fashion life after our idea of what's fair. The problem with that whole process, Roger, is that one person's idea and another person's idea of what's fair are always different. They're always going to be different because we have two different people. Mm-hmm. And so the concept of fairness is foundational for thinking about how systems don't end up working correctly, how they limit productivity, And fairness keeps people at odds with each other because they begin thinking in 50-50 terms, and that doesn't work in relationships. And whether the relationship is a couple relationship, a family relationship, or a business relationship.
Mm-hmm.
So tonight, what I thought I would do would be to spend just a few minutes talking about these characteristics that are foundational for fairness. And as we think about this idea of a pathogen, that concept of fairness has to do with how you give and receive based on fairness. And fairness is nothing more than what you feel like you owe someone and what you feel like you deserve from that other person. And so I would hope that tonight what we can do is think about what are some of the characteristics of fairness. And we start with obligation. It's interesting to me that when a child has a birthday party, the host gives party favors to the guests because they're bringing big gifts, and the host has small gifts that they give back. And in my mind, that's a function to some extent of a quid pro quo, or what's fair.
Yes.
And so what we want to do is we really get away from that and think about how do you receive freely. And so in receiving freely, you do that and just say thank you. So that the idea of interaction between two people based on fairness has a number of very limiting factors that really retard the whole process of growth in a system and doesn't facilitate health. It doesn't facilitate growth. It doesn't facilitate personal interaction that's authentic. And so when we start thinking about pathogens in business, in families, in any system, we start with the concept of what's fair. Two people thinking about what's fair isn't going to work because they're different people. That's the first concept. The second concept is the whole idea of what's fair starts with obligation. I'll bet if you were to ask someone when they receive a job, what did they owe that company, and what do they feel like they owe? For instance, what do they feel like they owe their parents? What do they feel like they owe others who've given them anything? Most people would give you a laundry list of all the things that they feel like they owe that business or that company, because they're beginning to receive based on what they think is fair. And so as I want to stop right here, I want to ask, Roger, are you there?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
I'm not seeing you. Can you hear me?
We're having a little bit. I can hear you. Yes, I can hear you. You guys are listening. We're having a little bit of technical difficulty with Blab. And I can hear Michael, but he can't hear me.
I can't see you.
I'm here.
Okay. I just don't see or hear you.
I'm here, and I can hear you. I'm typing on chat here, and I can hear you fine. Can you hear me yet?
So I'm
okay.
We don't have your audio or video available. There's a message here that says your connection. There's an error in the network. Make sure your connection isn't blocked by a firewall.
Yeah. Can you hear me now? You can't hear me now, Michael. I'm gonna
exercise a choice here instead of functioning based on what's fair, and ask, what would you like to do at this point, Roger? Do you want to sign out and come back in, or that might be the best thing to do at this point?
Yeah, I just sent Michael a message. I'm gonna sign out and come back in, so I'll be right back. I'm here. Can you hear me better?
You're there now.
Yeah, you weren't there at all. The show by yourself. I was trying to jump in, and you wouldn't let me because you couldn't hear me.
I couldn't hear a thing, man. I'm just rolling on.
I appreciate
where's Roger?
I want to jump in here because I heard everything you said. Obviously, you didn't know I could hear you, but and you talked about fairness, and I want to just give you an example of what happened to me a couple of weeks ago. People call me because I build good relationships with them, and then I'll leave, and then I'll come back and leave. But anyway, I got a phone call from a technician who I haven't worked with for 2 years. But when I met him, he was working for a client of mine, and he came into the organization, but I knew the culture that he had come from because I had worked for that gentleman. I have lots of business in the New York City area, and so I knew the culture that he came from. And every culture has its issues. You know, you're not going to find every place to be perfect. So he came into this new culture, and it was totally different. And this particular individual is a great technician. He's a great communicator. He has a really high average ticket. We love him. The owners love him. But he felt like he was being treated unfairly. And so he came to me, and I coached him through, what to do, but he was reluctant to go to the owners and work through the issues. And so I went to Ukraine for a while and came back, and I found out he was gone. He didn't tell me he was leaving, but he just left. And the owners didn't want him to go. I didn't want him to go, and he was doing a great job. And so he goes to another business, and I know that culture because I've worked in that company before too. And he's not going because I'm guiding him. He just wound up over there. So this particular guy's been 3 cultures that I've consulted in, and this culture he went to is a great culture. I know the guy that runs the business, but it's not perfect either. And so he calls me 2 Fridays ago, and he feels, quote, that he's being treated unfairly. And this has to do with, I don't want to get into the details, but he's still calling me. And what I talked to him about was encouraged him to, why are you calling me? Have you talked to the boss? No, I hadn't talked to the boss. Well, if it's his thinking. And I encouraged him. I said, listen, you've got to go to the boss, talk to the boss directly, get it off your chest, and you guys have got to work through this conflict. Right. And then I asked him, I said, when you were a kid and your mom and dad used to fight, what did you do? And he said, I used to just hide. And he said, I'd just leave. And I said, well, that's your issue. You're going to have to persevere through your fear, or the uncomfortable part of where you can't go to that conflict, or here's what's going to happen. You're going to wind up at another company, and it's just going to be a pattern, and nobody wants you to leave. And I said, another thing that's going to happen is you're going to marry a woman and not going to be able to fix that. You're going to wind up going to another woman. So I said, you've got to change the way you think in this issue. So I want you to talk to us about what pathogen is that? He's got a pathogen. He's not learning from his mistakes, as you call it, a pathogen, and he certainly isn't regulating himself, is he?
He's not. When you talk about, he says it's not fair. What I would suggest to you is that if you were to ask him, what does he owe that employer? He would give you a laundry list of all kinds of things that he feels like he owes them. And what that does, Roger, that whole concept of what I owe the employer it sounds great on the front end, but on the back end, what happens is it sets him up to build a case against the employer because he says, look at all I've done for you. And this leads to the entitlement that says, I've done all these things for the employer. And he ends up having so much resentment that he's not appreciated, he's not valued, he's not recognized to the level that he feels like he should be. And so he then leaves, and this whole process begins all over again, where it starts out where he feels like he owes the company everything or quite a bit. He then works real hard to try to satisfy what he thinks the company expects of him. It's not really what the company expects of him, but he's spinning his wheels diligently trying to get what he thinks the company expects and wants. And he can never get there because he makes them the standard and he can never measure up or be good enough. And I've heard this a million times, and you have too. When somebody makes their standard of good of am I good enough?
I actually had this happen with a client of mine on Friday, a client in another city. We were talking about some things. He called me for some advice on some things, and I urged him to talk to another client in another part of the country and how good he was doing. And he immediately began to compare himself to that other client. And they're both doing great. They're just doing different. And here's what the issue was. Why can't I grow my business that much? And what am I doing wrong? And, comparing. And I said, listen, you need to, in fact, I called him back the next day because, things go fast when you're talking to people. But in his situation, he's grown his profits tremendously. So, but yet he was looking at, well, why can't I grow my revenue? Well, he had a different set of issues, a different set of problems. We went in there and he was losing money, and now he's making a lot of money, but his revenue hasn't grown much. So, but we fixed other things. But he's got less people. He's got his average ticket up, so he's making money with what he wasn't making money with what he had. So, but yet he was wanting to compare himself, with another owner in another part of the country. Why do we do that?
We have a standard, and we're looking for security. I think that there are a whole lot of reasons why people do that, but we put a standard out there, and we idealize that person externally. That person you're talking to doesn't really know the ins and outs of what's going on in that other business. But when we think of it, when we look at another family or another business or another couple, we look at them and we say, wow, they've got it all together. And we know our stuff, and we know we don't have it all together, and we idealize them, and we come up short, and it all goes back to the concept of fairness. And we try harder, we work ourselves to death, and we end up empty inside because we can't measure up, we can't be good enough. And no matter what you do, no matter how hard you try, you end up ending the relationship because you're not good enough, you're not measuring up, and you've put your life in that other person's hands, especially in terms of an employee-employer relationship. And this accounts for turnover. This is why people leave businesses, because the way they start thinking about the very process of how do you interact with an employer who decides to take you in and hire you to work in their company. In my opinion, you have a relationship with that employer where it's not based on fairness. It's based on the employer's choice to hire you. And it's based on your choice to take that employment. And so they're willing to pay you so much, and you're willing to work for so much during that period of time. And then there's an evaluation, and you work under that evaluation. But it has nothing to do with fairness. But again, it goes back to we deceive ourselves thinking, I'm going to try to measure up. I'm going to be good enough. I'm going to get more from them than they've said they'll give me. And that sets us up for the frustration, the resentment that always results from receiving based on what's fair. And there are really two destinations. One is full of resentment, and the other is empty inside. And they both result in ending the relationship. And I've seen this in couple relationships. I've seen this in families. I've seen this where children have such a overwrought sense of everything that they've tried to do for a parent, and the parent doesn't appreciate it. Well, the parent doesn't even know. And with teenagers, what happens is a teenager will eat your food, he'll use your gasoline, he'll drive your car, he'll sleep in your house, and thinks he's doing all that for you. So the entitlement that we're talking about across the board.
Let me ask you this. If a person hires me as a consultant, I feel responsible to do what I told them I would do.
That's right. That's a different word, Roger. You take it on yourself internally.
Right. It's my,
and you
I
fulfill
own it.
that because it's yours to do.
And I'm not doing what they tell me to do.
That's right.
I own it. And when they start telling me to do stuff is when I have to back up and say, this, I have to do this my way because this is, I own this. If it doesn't work, it's my problem. And so let me ask, I think I'm understanding, if you go to work for somebody and you feel obligated, then when they begin to tell you how to do stuff that you disagree with, you're just going to comply and move forward and do stuff that do it a different way, not a different way, but a way they tell you. And then you just have a culture of people who feel obligated, do what they're told, and then they don't own anything. Is that what you're saying?
What happens also is that employer says, go do this job this way. And what you end up with is sabotage. Sometimes that employee says, I know how to do it better. I'm going to try it this way. And yet they don't then tell you when it blows up. And the employer is left going, what happened here? Well, he's caught between tell the truth and lie, but he's not owning his position. And that's the problem, because he started the whole process of receiving, and he's not authentic in terms of what he's doing. He's just complying with what the employer says. And then he defies, that's often a characteristic. And instead of taking ownership and saying, this is my job, it's what I'm doing, I'm going to do it the best I can, I'm going to do it out of my personal responsibility. That's what we're talking about.
Okay. All right. Now I have an example of my leadership skills when I was younger, and I want you to sort of diagnose, because we've got people listening on Facebook. I know who these people are, and they're listening because they got the same issue, and I had it. So I want to hear what you say to this. I had a gentleman whose name was Lawton. He wouldn't care if I mentioned his name. I love Lawton, and but Lawton's issue was when you gave him a job, he could do a great job, but he had a tendency to tear everything out and then step back and look at it and then put it all back in new. And he wasted, I don't want to say wasted a lot of time, but that was just his way of doing it. And sometimes that was okay, but it took longer. And I'm okay with it taking longer if I've got enough, in the job, if we sold it for enough. So one day we had a job for the Bessemer Fire Department, and I sold the job, and it was a competitive situation, and we didn't have a lot of margin in it. And I told Lawton, I said, Lawton, I want you to go over there, look at the job. We got to get this done today in 8 to 12 hours. If you don't feel like you can do the job in 8 to 12 hours, don't touch nothing. Okay. And it was like the fire department was 2 blocks up the road. And here's Lawton standing at my desk, just angry. He's mad. And I knew what it was. He couldn't figure out how to do it. He said, you can't do that job in 8 to 12 hours. That's 2 days. And I said, well, and he's the expert, but I had learned a good bit about it. So I said, well, let's go look at it together. And I said, well, tell me what you're going to do. Show me what you're going to do. And he said, he's going to do this. It was tearing out stuff. And I said, well, let me ask you this. Can we do A, B, and C? And he looked at me and he said, well, if that's the way you want to do it. And I said, well, it's not that I want to do it that way. It's just if we do it that way, it can get done in this length of time and we can reach our objective. Now, am I telling a guy something I shouldn't tell him? Am I giving orders, or help me?
It sounds like he might have been a little perfectionistic.
He is. That was his issue.
He wants to do it exactly perfect. And so you have to tear everything out and put it all back in just right. And you didn't have the margin and in the job to be able to do that. And so what you're kind of referring to is that his reactivity, when you go in and you say, hey, you know what, can we do A, B, and C? then that's not going to be perfect. How does the issue is this, how does he do the job and take ownership of it when you said, hey, I want you to do it this way?
Well, I didn't tell him I want you. I asked him if he could.
It seems to me that he needs to receive that from you freely.
Yes.
That's what I'm saying.
Yes. And
so when he receives it from you freely, then he's grateful that you said, what do you think about A, B, and C? He'd be able to say, you know what? Yeah, I think we can do that. So it frees him up of this whole need to have resentment and bitterness and frustration, because he's wound up about how he does it, and he needs to be able to share it with you and still at the same time take ownership of implementing it.
Mm-hmm. Well, okay, wound up about how he does it. And one of the symptoms of some of this wrong thinking is emotional overreactivity. That's right.
It's overfunctioning and underfunctioning. That's right.
We could talk about that for another 30 minutes. We might. That'll be our show for next week. Michael, we've got just a couple of minutes. I want to keep boundaries up for the show and go 30 minutes a week. Anything else you'd like to tell the audience before we wrap up?
This whole process of receiving freely and versus receiving fairly is across the board. It's a process that we're all engaged in. It's a battle in between, I would say, how you feel and how you think. And we're trying to help people think more imaginatively, more creatively, so that they end up with better relationships.
And the proper thinking here is not proper, but just a different way to think, so you can take out the pathological thinking in the culture to get the pathogen out. Is that a good way to put it? Is pathological thinking?
That's right.
Is that it? Okay. So think about when you're hired, you don't owe your employer nothing. And he doesn't owe you anything. But you need to think, I have a responsibility to own the things in the business that they want me to own. And then I need to use my mind and my thoughts and my creativity and own my role in the business like it's mine.
That's right. Actually, I would even say own your role in the business as if it is your business.
As if it is your business. Yes. And because that's what I do. And that's what you do. And we wake up unemployed every morning.
That's right.
So really it's about, I'm beginning to understand this. So we talked about obligation, resentment. We didn't really get to entitlement. I got a lot of other things I wanted to talk about, but we're going to wrap this up. And before we go, we want to thank you for watching tonight's show. Please go to my website, rogerdaviston.com, and sign up for the premium content by giving us your email. We got a lot of premium content there that's free. Just would like to have your email so we can keep in touch with you and get you in the loop for other stuff. And if you're watching tonight on YouTube and you enjoyed the show, go ahead and share it with somebody and give us a thumbs up. We'd appreciate that. Michael, I've enjoyed it tonight, and we'll see you next week. Facebook friends every Sunday night at 8 p.m. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
See you later.